I was driving a lot of that early stuff. And it turns out I was solving like problems 3 or 4 for customers, which was how do you automate your security operations for cloud? And when we started doing this 5 years ago, it turns out most of them were at stage 1, which is just tell me what the heck I have in the cloud in the first place and show me what it is and show me how it's configured. Now that evolved into the cloud security posture management market. And that first problem was visibility. And then maybe the second problem was observability. And the third problem was remediation. And we jumped to remediation and kind of like wavered back and forth a little bit in the middle. And, this is like kind of the dirty internal secrets of you don't get it right and you're looking for market fit. And it was a very valuable lesson to kind of take a step back and like, what are the first problems people need to solve today? And I probably shouldn't make them buy something before they realize my product is going to be helpful and useful.
So was the reason that it was too far, or was that there were other steps that were prerequisites to jumping to remediation, and customers just weren't as comfortable with those stages yet to be able to jump to that point? Was that it?
There was a lot of that. I think a lot of it was, we had capabilities to identify problems, and then we were packaging the automated remediations. And we ran into some interesting issues, and these are things we further subsequently had to solve. A lot of security teams were used to working primarily with like vulnerability assessment compliance tools, and they wanted those compliance reports coming out. And at one point we even had that, but there's like 8 different ways you can solve some of those problems in cloud. So even though you can automate it, automating it so you can properly detect and filter through all those eight different ways. And the end result was the customers, they just wanted a dashboard where they could look in, generate a spreadsheet, send it to the developers to fix the problem, because that's what we've always done. What we were trying to do is introduce this different concept of automation and letting the platform do those things for you and getting rid of the spreadsheets and make it more collaborative between the teams. And we just jumped ahead of the market. And legitimately, like, I'm not saying we jumped ahead of the market as in we're smarter. Legitimately, we forgot that the first problem that they were facing was, oh crap, I have all these new cloud accounts. Just show me my problems. Like, tell me what I have and tell me what I need to fix. And we didn't focus on that visibility. And there's other products and such that did, and those were easier to sell because it fit into the mental models, as well as it was the problem they were trying to solve at that time. Where we were moving on to automation, and one of the things we underestimated was dev teams or cloud teams maybe don't want security automatically fixing their stuff. Security maybe doesn't want the dev teams writing their own security policies into the platform. So we did a poor job of addressing the organizational silos, which weren't there because anybody was like doing anything wrong. That's just how we've done things. We built that because it was the right way to handle our other security problems. So we just got too out there. We didn't solve the first problem customers need to solve, which is tell me what my problem is now. We kind of were jumped into, we're going to fix that for you, or we're going to help you fix that problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I feel like you're taking a bit more of the blame than you maybe need to, because I feel like, well, and you tell me if I'm wrong, that some of it is that companies weren't exactly sure how to do stuff in the cloud anyway. Yeah. So maybe they're still getting settled in figuring out like what these workflows should be like, what the DevOps security relationship should be like, who should be pushing that button or this button or pushing a policy.
Yeah, that's exactly what a lot of that is. It's like understanding the processes, and a lot of how we have normally done things falls apart a bit. So the what I've been talking a lot about lately is like in the last few months, like if we really look at the biggest impact cloud has had in terms of our governance and security, and I hate to say governance because I'm not a governance person, I'm more of a technologist. But if we really look at what the core problem is all of our security and org structures and everything's evolved along with our data centers and our offices. And with cloud, what happened is we got rid of a lot of the physical constraints. So like the fact that we have a network team, somebody to plug the wires into the routers, and the fact that we have, different server management teams and different, security firewall management and identity, like all the different teams that we have, many of those are emergent properties of the environment they were in, which is the physical data centers, where you can't have developers running around building their own servers and plugging and unplugging wires. I mean, it's chaos. It's cats and dogs living together. And that's okay. That's exactly what we needed. But with cloud abstracted a lot of the complexity. Cloud centralized that and distributed it at the same time. You've got one user interface you can go into, and you can build an entire virtual data center. And if all you want is a simple network with a little bit of public and a little bit of private, that's all you have to build. And you can literally do it in a web interface or with some API calls. Like, you don't need a network team to do that for you. You don't need the deep expertise of configuring, a Cisco or a Juniper or, whatever kind of routing infrastructure you have. The developers can cover the basics. And that blew everything apart. And the obvious first impact onto the security teams was, show me what I have and how it's configured, because I sure as heck don't know. And I can't just go to a networking team to figure it out. And like I said, we kind of just made some assumptions about where people were that was wrong, and about which problems they needed to solve first. But I think the whole thing, I mean, I love this stuff and it's fascinating. And despite the rough edges and, falling off the bike a few times, including I fell off my mountain bike last weekend. My butt really hurts still, but never mind. I nobody cares.
Yeah,
I care. Rich.
No, I had a mountain biking incident last year and had to regrow most of the skin on this forearm. So yeah,
I was going uphill and it was really slow, but my cleat was loose and I didn't know it. And I just went to pop my foot out because I'm like, oh, okay, I need to just haul the bike up this part. And I twisted it almost 90 degrees. I still couldn't get it out. And then I went timber, very slow fall to the side at slow speed, but my seat was up high. So that meant my butt hit the rock and it hurt.
Yeah, you guys have to channel your inner Tyler's workout routine because you'll never get injured. You just never work out.
That's good. And I would look very different at my current age if I...
So Rich, I have a couple questions for you.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I have also done a handful of startups over the years, and I've kind of fallen into similar traps. And sometimes you hit the home run, sometimes you don't. And I appreciate there's a certain amount of timing that comes along with building a startup. And I would argue that a lot of the times the equation of what we're building is not actually that hard from a technical perspective. Like, you see the pain fairly quickly, but it's a matter of, am I too early? Am I too late? Will the market get subsumed by some other adjacent market before I can get true business growth? All those kinds of things. So I appreciate the roller coaster ride that you described at the start of the conversation. The question I have is, if we're looking at cloud security market today, specifically CSPM. What's your thoughts on CSPM with regards to the other adjacent cloud security markets, right? And we could rattle off 20 different acronyms. We could rattle off, what is it?
Yeah, but let's not.
CWPP is CNAP.
CWPP, CNAP, CASM, blah, 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 right? What's your take on CSPM where it fits into that puzzle, right? I have a theory that CSPM is a market that existed for a while and really doesn't exist anymore, because to do any of those secondary markets I just described, you have to essentially do basic CSPM, right? You have to understand what's there and how it works and how it's configured if you want to secure it. So in that thought model, does CSPM cease to exist as an isolated market if it's part of every other market?
Yeah, that is actually an excellent question. It kind of drives at some of the stuff we did when we were coming up with the topic for today. And first of all, as much as I've been negative, like, I got a successful exit, so I can't really say we missed the mark. I mean, in the end, we end up addressing something, but this ties into your question. What does CSPM mean? It has been an evolving definition, and the early definition of CSPM, which came out of Gartner, was, it was very focused on the configuration visibility piece. Show me what I have. Show me how it's misconfigured. Cloud security posture management. I mean, just show me what it is. And some of the tools had some limited abilities to do remediations. Now, we're finding, for example, for ourselves, that we have to add a lot more, and we keep adding a lot more of the inventory visibility, because that is becoming, for us to do more in-depth. We do cloud detection and response and cloud SOAR and access management, like all these operational things that we're focused on being more of an ops tool. Can't do any of that without the feeds, as you brought it up, Tyler. I mean, we You need to know what's there and how it's configured. I would say the key difference is there's still what I would call the baseline CSPM. There's well over 100 vendors who have this capability now. And the focus on that is the base configuration and compliance reports. And there is going to be somebody that needs that top level view, and they're going to need to generate those compliance reports. And not all of the ancillary adjacent markets, products have that or want to do that. Like, we're having the debate. Do we need to add that just to make it easier for someone to buy the stuff that we actually care about? And not that we don't care about that, not that it's important. It's just not, we hit focus on these other problems that we thought we could bring more value to the table, which is, becomes a complex and an interesting question to answer. So I would say there is always going to be the core of what CSPM was, which I would call the vulnerability scanner for cloud and the compliance reports for cloud. Then we see that beyond that is where we see all the fracturing I think you're talking about. So there's a couple of main, what I'm going to call work streams of the fracturing, so shards. So one shard is focused on the workload piece of that. And the workload piece starts bridging into containers, because containers are a major part of the workload. So cloud workload protection originally started as basically AV agents for cloud. I'm overly simplifying, but it's kind of what it is. And now is expanding from the workload side up into more of the main cloud platform side. So almost in reverse, they're adding more container capabilities and serverless capabilities and more configuration capabilities. So we can kind of call that the shard one, which is more the workload focused. There's the shard two, which is around identity management. I think that's a much earlier area. We actually have something new there that I love, but you've got pressure coming from the top from the identity governance tools, but then those don't do a great job from the cloud piece. And then you have the federated identity brokers. And so now we're seeing this other intersection. Ooh, my camera's zooming all over the place as my hands move. If anybody wants to know how bad the software is on the new Mac Studio display for handling the camera stuff, now you get to see it. Let me go to a fixed view here. So that would be the next area, or one of the next areas, is these identity management focused pieces. And the reason the configuration matters is you can't really do cloud identity management without integrating the full spectrum, which includes the policies around the cloud resources themselves. So, And that's where we get into the, do I have access to that S3 bucket? That could be granted on the S3 side, or it could be granted on the, within the IAM side. And I'm using Amazon examples there. Then there's another shard, which is the remediation piece. We are focused. That's one of the things, for example, that we built a lot in. That's really nascent in that area as well, just because customers aren't fully always on board with that. But yeah, and then there's all these other really interesting things coming out. If you look at Wiz and Palo are trying to do the cloud security posture management, plus the container security, plus the workload security, plus the infrastructure as code security, plus, maybe attack surface management or analysis pieces. And I hate to talk with this much complexity in how I'm laying this out. It's because at the core, if you think about what cloud is, we're all just running off a bunch of APIs, and we're enriching those and manipulating those in different ways. Yep. And that's why there's can be different ways to solve the same problem, or different audiences that the various vendors are trying to address with their tools to solve those problems. Because the IR team wants it this way, and the compliance team wants it this way, and the traditional security team and the endpoint team, they all want to see things different ways. So I do think it creates a lot of complexity and a lot of confusion. And I don't think that's going to go away. And I think what you said, which is the CSPM, we're hitting the point where some of the analysts are just lumping everything into CSPM. And I think that's falling apart and fracturing. And we're going to start seeing sub-markets develop that become entire markets on their own.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I agree completely. And I think it also sets up an interesting roll-up opportunity, exactly like you talked about, Paulo, with others kind of, rolling up multiple companies and products into a one ring to rule them scenario, which could be fantastic or simultaneously could, be a dumpster fire. It just depends on how the integration works and how good the company is at acquisitions. But it's neat to kind of track how these markets align. Then the second question that I often wonder is, do we really, from a timing perspective, right? Do we really need to focus on the maturity of the buyer? In particular, everybody talks about, hey, let's cut our business up and target enterprise versus commercial versus small business, whatever. And that's fine. That's one way to do it. I like making the argument that maybe we should cut our business up and target specific maturity curves of the buyer. The super high growth, high tech, security rock star buyer versus a slow maturity, just trying to figure out how to put stuff in the cloud buyer, right? And I feel like that's the better curve when it comes to building out some of these products, targeting certain sections of that curve.
Yeah, you raised two really, really good points here. So the first about the one ring to rule them all. What's fascinating about that is they're going to be different buying centers at enterprise scale. And as somebody that is in a position where we have multiple product lines that address different parts of the organization. So like over the past few weeks coming up on board full-time at FireMon, I've had to learn our traditional products, which have some cloud features. So we've got Lumeta for cybersecurity asset management. We've got our network security policy management product, like the core of it. And then we've got my stuff, the DisruptOps, the cloud piece. And it's like, yeah, we could tie all of those together into one platform, but then who the hell do we sell it to? And I think, some of the companies we mentioned are going to run into that and do already run into that, because there's going to be a different group managing the containers versus managing the cloud infrastructure versus the dev teams that manage their own stuff. Where I think becomes interesting is where can we bridge across those with shared capabilities, but still meet the needs of those teams. And we have our own biased ways we do. We do a lot of stuff with chat ops and Slack, using that to mediate the communications, but we're all going to be like figuring our way down that path. And that's a really interesting problem. And it ties into your maturity. And that's something we tried to kind of do, was like, all right, well, we'll focus on the born in the clouds, and they do have slightly different needs than the traditional infrastructure. But the traditional companies, Tyler, let's be blunt, they got more money. Like the true cloud unicorns, they just build their own stuff largely, and they use a little bit of the outside stuff. The large enterprises are the ones that need the more help, and they're all over the map. And the really interesting thing that I found before we even started DisruptOps, just as part of my core Securosis research, is any large organization will have pockets of high maturity and pockets of low maturity. And the complexity for the teams managing that have to manage across all of those is, how do you address like this new, like you work for a bank and that bank has this new customer facing app and that was born in the cloud. And maybe there's one connection back to a database on the back end. That's very, very, very different than like refactoring and rehosting back office infrastructures, then migrating data centers. So I don't think we actually can just target by maturity levels. And I don't think we as security professionals outside of the vendor side of it, as trying to target educational materials and strategies, because most larger orgs in particular will have multiple maturity levels. So what I've kind of moved down the path of, and we built a maturity model, over at Securosis with IONS. And one of the things that we really emphasize when we give the maturity model to people is, you're going to have a baseline, which is like your average rating, and you need to recognize the pockets and use that to help drive your strategy. Like, let's figure out what the pockets are doing well and see if we can operationalize that across the rest of the organization. Or, let's figure out where we're doing really bad, and maybe that's where we focus more efforts to get them up more to like, a level 3 baseline or something along those lines. And does that fit in with, does that kind of fit in with what you were thinking?
Sorry, couldn't find the mute button. The mute button's always a Always a mystery to me. No, I think that's spot on, right? And I love the analogy you gave. I hadn't really thought about the pockets of maturity. I think the pockets of maturity is a really interesting way you think of it.
It's also
and
the
here
name
at
of my
Jupiter One,
band. So
Pockets of Maturity. I love that. That's a great name. We should jam together sometime. But here at Jupiter One, we're targeting those pockets of maturity within some of the enterprise buyers right now as we continue to sell up the enterprise stack. So yeah, no, I definitely find it to be spot on.
yeah, I mean, you
I'll
deal
throw
with
it
this
back.
exactly because we hover in different parts, and we overlap. We're going to compete and stuff, and not compete. And same with Adrian. Same with any of us. Anybody who's doing
Yeah.
anything in cloud is going to be dealing with these issues and overlapping and carving out spaces and figuring out who to target and the levels of maturity within the customers. And I think we're still years away from any of that settling out because it is hard to move ships into this new realm, and it does take time. And the cloud changes so quickly. The providers change the ground under our feet as we're running the race, and that's okay. I mean, I enjoy that stuff, so it's great. But it does make life a little harder.
I love the direction this went. We do need to wrap in a few, but I wanted to throw something out and get see how it hits Tyler, you, and Rich. 3 or 4 times a month, I advise companies on their asset management program at IANS. And Rich, I'd forgotten you were faculty at IANS as well. But one of the conclusions that I came to is that maybe it's okay to have several products doing kind of the same thing, because you have different parts of the business that have different needs from those products. And asset management is one of those things where you see a lot of duplication of effort, but how the data is delivered, how it's handed to people is different. And honestly, companies where the service desk, maybe part of IT, security actually have different asset management databases, from what I've observed, seem to function better than a company that's trying to force everyone to use ServiceNow. And the challenges I've seen there is just that, that like none of them can agree on how to do it, and ServiceNow has to be customized to meet everyone's individual needs, and then they have to hire some ServiceNow consultants to customize it, and it's just this never-ending project that never gets there. Whereas if they just split up and got what they individually needed, they'd probably be fine.
Look at it this way. Let's take a story, and if you look at the origins of Spider-Man, I can watch it in a movie. I can read it in a comic book. I can read it in a regular book. I can read it in an audio book. Like, it's still the same core myth. And I'm using that because if I look at and this is not a view I always had. This is a view that I have grown into probably over the past 3 to 5 years as we've kind of had to deal with some of these things. It's, if I have a source of truth, how I present that information should help. There's different audiences that need different things out of that. I was dealing with this today. This is like really dirty behind the scenes kinds of things. Like if I think about a cloud network, for example, and cloud assets. So we have an asset management tool that came out on premise. We've got an asset management tool or a network management tool that for regular on-premise that was very firewall focused. And then we have our cloud tool. All 3 of those things need the exact same data, but they're using different use cases and addressing different audiences. And I think if we try to force people into using just one way of doing that, we're not necessarily going to, it's just not necessarily going to work for customers the same way as if let's give them, maybe we build a service to optimize how we collect and, build the database for that, but then we can present it to help somebody solve the problem they're facing at that time. Customization and addressing the right audience, I think is really critical. I think the problem with some of these massive platforms is, it's hard because you're duplicating development effort, to be honest. And everybody wants the efficiencies of having one thing. But like I do like healthcare stuff. I'm a paramedic. I go into hospitals and the EMRs are horrific. They have all this wonderful data and everything else, but because they're trying to address an emergency room doctor and a radiologist and a nurse and the lowly paramedic me all doing we all have different things we're trying to do using the same base tool, and that means we all hate the tool equally. I don't know. I would just hope that there's opportunities to build different ways of attacking those problems.
Yeah, and thankfully, I think we've got enough funding in the market to make that happen. Certainly, it's some of what we're going to talk about in the news segment today. We're going to do an update on the number of unicorns out there. But yeah, it's interesting watching all this stuff shake out. Rich, thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today. Is there anything you want to, any announcements or shout outs you want to give before we let you go?
No, just everybody be good to one another. It's an ugly world out there.
You going to be at RSA Black Hat doing any training this year?
We will. So I'll be at RSA doing some customer stuff, and then I'm giving a talk actually on the show floor for the first time. And then Black Hat, we're doing training. So I teamed up with Will Bankson. He's over at HashiCorp. He's like one of the best cloud security people I've ever met. And we're doing incident response. So I can't remember the exact name that we use this year. Oh, I think it's a live fire incident response with attack simulations and defenses and log analysis and all sorts of cool stuff.
Nice. That sounds awesome. Rich, thanks again for joining us today. And stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk digital identity with Andrew Hindle from Identiverse.
Imagine this scenario. You're out of the office unexpectedly, and a colleague pings you because they need access to some system you have credentials for. Now, my listeners would never send passwords over email or Slack. But what about your coworkers? How many organizations out there are sending logins back and forth in plain text? Worse yet, how many just store all of their logins on a shared spreadsheet? Keeper Security's password management platform locks down logins, payment cards, and more in a patented zero-knowledge encrypted vault. Sign up for a Keeper free trial today. Visit securityweekly.com/Keeper. Picture your team being able to map out the external attack surface as it grows and see the same attack vectors as a hacker does. Most tools out there do asset discovery, but stop there. Enter Detectify. It takes an inventory of exposed web assets and automates vulnerability testing for security misconfigurations, expiring subdomains, and risks in third-party software. Here's the cool part. They crowdsource payloads from leading ethical hackers. It finds bugs you actually want to fix and finds them in time. Start a free 2-week trial by visiting securityweekly.com/Detectify. Go hack yourself.
Can your incident response technology collect from off-network endpoints? Xterra FTK Enterprise can. Endpoints are no longer located in a physical office, and organizations need a comprehensive investigation tool that enables holistic data collection and review. With FTK Enterprise, you can also scan for IOCs and MISP indicators. You can scan with Yara rules, and you can use integrations to trigger automatic endpoint collections. Visit securityweekly.com/Xterra for access to their white paper, Incident Response for a Remote World. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. All right, quick ad here before we get on to some announcements, and then we'll get to our second interview here. Deepwatch helps secure the digital economy by protecting and defending enterprise networks everywhere, every day. Deepwatch leverages its highly automated cloud-based SOC platform backed by a world-class team of experts who monitor, detect, and respond to threats on customers' digital assets 24/7, 365. Many of the world's leading brands rely on Deepwatch's managed detection and response expertise. Visit securityweekly.com/Deepwatch to learn more. All right. And do you have a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover in one of the shows? Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and completing the form. We review suggestions monthly and we'll reach out to you once reviewed. All right. For our second interview today, Andrew Hindle joins us to talk about digital identity. Andrew is an independent consultant specializing in digital identity, privacy, and cybersecurity. He served as the Identiverse Content Chair for 8 years. Welcome to the show, Andrew.
Hi, Jim. It's nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. So first off, tell us a little bit about Identiverse and your history with it. Were you one of the founders of the conference?
So I was involved early on, but the founder of the event is actually my friend and colleague, Andre Duran. So Andre is the CEO and founder of Ping Identity, one of the major vendors in the digital identity space. And he recognized, some years ago now, this would be our 13th year of running Identiverse, so a little bit before that, right? As applications were deploying to the cloud, there was an understanding essentially that the identity industry didn't really know how to deal with handling identity in the cloud. And so Andre pulled together a small number of experts in the field, some of the larger vendors in the space as well, and actually initially ran just a summit. And in fact, the conference was originally called Cloud Identity Summit. And it really was a summit, right? It was like, 50 people maybe in a room figuring out what do we do next. And one of the things that came out of that was the notion that, we should continue to have this gathering year over year. I was actually an employee with Ping at the time, and I left the company at the end of 2013. And then Andre gave me a call, 2014, 2015, and said, "Hey, do you want to come back and help us out as a consultant? Sort of looking after the agenda and the content and all the rest of it." And so I've had the honor of having that role of chairing the content committee that we pull together each year, since that point in time. So,
and I assume that role as the chair of the content committee, you're really looking at, okay, what are the trends? What do we want to focus our talks on? How do we divide up? I assume you have multiple tracks with, I think it's something like 150 speakers you have over 4 days. So what are those tracks going to be? So what are the? Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, you're right. It's a reasonably large agenda. It's a reasonably large industry, right? And so there's a lot for us to talk about. One of the things that we do, and we kind of look at this each year, right? So the content committee, yes, as you described, looks at some of the trends and discusses those. But we also run, and in fact, most of the agenda is populated by a public open call for presentations. And so there's this balance, right? I blogged about this 3 years ago, but there's a balance about, on the one hand, there's a science of looking at a market, understanding what's happening, getting, input from various people that are doing various things in the space and in adjacent industries like cybersecurity, like privacy. And on the other hand, you want to react to what you get that's coming up from people who are actually deploying this, in the field. And you want to look at what's happening in the standards bodies. Where are those organizations headed? What problems are they trying to solve? What's happening in the regulatory space? There's a lot to juggle, but it's fun. And getting that kind of broad view of everything that's happening is very rewarding.
Yeah, and I got my own personal kind of introduction into how broad the space is getting. When I had to log into the IRS recently and set up an account with I think it was ID.me.
Probably ID.me. Yeah, there's several players in that space. But it's funny you mentioned that. So one of the things that we run into a little bit, right, is that there's this tendency for people to bring whatever background it is, professional background it is that they come from, into the identity space, right? So if you're a cybersecurity professional, you look at identity through a cybersecurity lens. If you are, a document verification professional, you come at this from a very different perspective, right? You're thinking about, how do I establish, authentically that somebody is who they claim to be? What are the problems going to be if they don't have certain documents? What are the KYC regulations that are going to apply? If you come at this from a privacy perspective, again, completely different, kind of ball game in terms of the things that are going to be pertinent to you. And we, the identity industry as a whole, and by extension, Identiverse, we have to kind of consider all of that and try and pick up on all of those different threads.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It sounds like you're going to have speakers and topics stretching from, cloud security to enterprise security, and then all the way to some consumer type stuff, and even like the use case I talked about, where the IRS is now partnered with one identity provider for all Americans.
Yeah, and I always laugh at the term identity provider, right? So it gets used a lot, and everybody has a different sense of what that means. But you're right; it's a very vibrant market, and the last couple of years have really seen things, accelerate, particularly in terms of the way that I guess the ordinary consumer thinks about interacting with these things. In fact, I had my own little experience just earlier today. So we're doing some legal stuff for the family here. And although, the lawyer that we work with literally is a 5-minute walk from home, but over the last 2 years, they've decided, we're going to move everyone online and we're going to use this service to do, digital identity verification. So I'm in the industry. I know the company that's providing this service, right? I'm not going to name them, but I know who they are. I know how their technology works. And yet I'm going through this process, and as an end user with my kind of end user hat on, I'm like, this is a little bit uncomfortable. And I'm not sure I want to send you a photograph of my passport like that. That goes against everything that, we've been taught, right, for the last, 40 years. And it's the same with passwords, right? So passwordless is this big trend. I'm sure you've had people, on the show talking about it quite a bit. And yet it introduces some really interesting, again, consumer end user challenges in terms of, we've spent 30 years training people but they have to have these really complicated passwords. And a whole market has grown up around password managers to help people deal with that. And to some extent, right, some of the early deployments of things like Identity Federation, single sign-on, particularly for the workforce, were not driven by, but certainly helped to address the problem of password proliferation and all the security challenges and usability challenges that go along with that. And so here we are with some really good solutions to that, some of the new standards that are out there. I mean, you look at what's happening with things like WebAuthn, with Passkey, there's a whole bunch of stuff. And yet, you talk to, and I don't know, Adrian, maybe I don't know if you have the same experience, but I know a lot of folks, you know, kind of my age, and they've got parents, for example, and their IT support, right? And the number of times I get calls from my dad, and he's like, well, you know, I'm going to this site and they don't seem to want me to log in with the normal way. And that's confusing and worrying to me. We have exactly the same problem with, you know, with the document verification. Like I said, it's challenging, and it's very easy to forget that there is an end user at the end of all of this, right? Whether that's somebody in a large enterprise that's working, whether it's a consumer, there are some tricky challenges there.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent point that I hadn't considered before we chatted. You know, because I think in this industry, you know, like we're looking forward to the death of the password. You know, we get excited when we hear about, you know, I don't have to manage these things anymore. I'm just going to use a security key in my phone and like all these other factors. You know, but to other people, it's like, wait a minute, like, I've been dealing with passwords for 40 years. All of a sudden, you tell me I don't need one. How, you know, like it breaks. Well, not only the trust model, you know, what they're comfortable with, but yeah, you can't just dump somebody into that situation where you're like, all right, now you're just going to pick one of these 5 fruits, and that's how you log in. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I mean, you mentioned the word trust, Adrian. You're right. I mean, it's such a big part of this, and that goes well beyond, you know, just the end user or the, you know, the employee or the, you know, the workforce. It goes between organizations. It goes across international boundaries, right? So, you know, some of the questions that the industry is now starting to try and grapple with are things like, well, how do I trust that an assertion of a particular identity, you know, document or fact or, you know, whatever it might be, that's issued to me by a given provider is actually valid, right? And so, you know, we know from a technical standpoint that there are ways to deal with that with crypto and all the rest of it. And I'm using the term crypto to mean what it is supposed to mean, cryptography. Thank you. But you know, it's not actually an easy problem to solve when you're dealing with multiple jurisdictions and multiple sets of regulations. And so there are some interesting, you know, kind of challenges around that trust area. It's actually our sort of primary theme for the conference this year is around trust and looking at you know, some of those technical challenges, but also some of the end user issues that are around that. So. Yeah, I think one of the fascinating things is at one point in time, it seemed like SSO was going to solve a lot of these problems, and, you know, we wouldn't be asked to give the same information over and over again. You know, we would just give it to Google or we would give it to Apple, and they would log us into things, and then we'd be presented with, okay, how much do you want to share with them? And that model exists, but it didn't end up being as you know, widely deployed as I think we would have expected maybe 10 or 15 years ago when we first started seeing that kind of stuff rolling out.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair point, Adrian. And, you know, it's interesting because if you look at this from the enterprise perspective, you know, very, very much a success story, right? So the number of particularly large enterprises where that identity federation or, you know, slightly more narrowly sort of enterprise single sign-on, well deployed, well used in you know, common practice, and has really solved a lot of those issues and a whole bunch of other stuff besides, you know, reduces the attack surface, so lots of good cybersecurity benefits, increases adoption of workforce tools, which is, you know, good for those departments that you know, are spearheading those sort of digital transformation initiatives. But it takes a long time to deploy those kinds of technologies. And that isn't just about the tech, right? It's also about, like we were saying before, it's about training users, getting users comfortable with stuff, understanding what problems are going to arise, how you're going to solve them, all of those things. And so I think it probably took a lot longer than most of us in the industry thought it was going to take to get that stuff just done for the enterprise. And we're probably not done yet, right? I mean, there's probably lots of enterprises out there who are still in the process of doing those deployments. And so, getting it out as far as consumers, frankly, the world kind of caught up and moved on, right? And so now we're starting to see a lot more progress in the areas of personal identity, right? I'm slightly trying to avoid some of the loaded terms around self-sovereign identity and identity on the blockchain and those kinds of things, decentralized identity. But that general trend of personal identity is coming along very rapidly. And now I'm guessing, right? I'm hypothesizing entirely, but I wonder whether what we'll start to see is those technologies starting to enable a better, more seamless customer experience from an identity standpoint. Because the reality is identity for most of these digital systems is the front door, right? So how do we make that front door easier to get through? And I wonder whether, some of the personal identity technologies will start to help us do that. The trick will be making sure that we do that in a trustable way, right? In a way that people feel comfortable with, rather than them feeling like, their information is going somewhere and they don't understand that, and it makes them nervous and they don't want to engage.
Yeah, so I'm not sure I'm 100% following you there, because I might not be fully aware of the trend there. But I think one of my frustrations is that it feels like the technology is there to make this pretty painless, pretty seamless, because you interact with some companies, with some applications, with some organizations, and you're like, wow, this is how it should be. This is how it should work. Mm-hmm. But then you go to another one and they're following a different standard, because of course there's 28 standards to follow, and anybody can choose any of them. So so are you saying we're getting? Are you saying we're getting closer to a point where maybe some regulations and things like that will force it to be a little bit more standardized, or is there some future where it's not as disjointed as it currently is?
Yeah. So I think from a technical standpoint, yes, there are some new things coming along, but leaving those to one side, I think there's pretty solid consensus today around technically how do we do this. I think the bigger challenge has been, in all honesty, helping large enterprises understand that the key to providing the kinds of seamless experiences you described starts with identity. And for the longest time, identity in most large enterprises sits somewhere in cybersecurity, and people think of it that way, right? It's part of my security solution. Okay, except it isn't, right? It's actually part of your customer enablement solution. And if you start your project there, and that's what you see a lot of you mentioned some services that you've been to that provide a much better, a much more seamless experience. And in many, many cases, what we find when we go digging around in there is, somebody right at the very beginning of that project went, hold on, this is actually an identity problem. Let's solve for that. And then we can build a really strong customer experience off the back of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a daily challenge too. I remember, I think it was yesterday, I logged into a Google Chat or a Google Meet for work, and my boss noticed. He said, "Oh, you logged in from your personal Gmail account." I was like, "Not on purpose. I just clicked the link." I don't know how it decides these things, because I'm logged into this browser with two different Google accounts. And when I open Drive, it defaults to my personal, and then I got to click the thing up in the corner and open up yet another tab in a different drive. And on some of my systems,
I'm glad I'm not the only one that this happens to. Like every
on some of my systems,
day.
You definitely on.
I actually have up to 3, sometimes 4 different browser profiles just so that all my OAuth, all my logins into my multiple Office 365 accounts, my multiple Google accounts are somewhat segregated. So that when I go to mail.outlook.com or whatever, like it's opening the mailbox I expect to see. And it's a mess.
Absolutely. It is. And, one of the difficulties here is we want it both ways. I have exactly the same problem, by the way, in spades. And we want it both ways, right? So on the one hand, I'm a person. These are all just parts of who I am, right? They're all parts of my identity. On the other hand, I don't want the streams to cross, right? So this is my work persona. This is my work persona for this particular client and for another client. And then, it gets hard.
Yeah, it's always interesting. Like you'll see somebody join a Zoom or something like that, and it's got their hacker handle or their pet name when what they wanted to show up was like their professional identity, right? Like, and it's because all these applications helpfully remember stuff. Like I've got one that I log into. I think it's every time I log into a Ring Central, it uses my full hacker handle, which I don't usually use. And I still have not figured out where it's pulling that from. But as I log in, it says, hey, do you want to change your name? And I have to manually change it every time. And I still haven't figured out where that's getting pulled from.
Yeah, no, you're right. And yet, the other thing that's worth bearing in mind here, and this is one of those things that I think is sometimes a little difficult for us all to remember, particularly in sort of the high-tech end of the industry, is, what we're describing are, I guess, almost like power user problems, right? And yet at the other end of the spectrum, there's a whole bunch of other challenges around identity that revolve around people who maybe don't have access to a computer or to a phone, certainly a smartphone. And we're cheerfully building these systems and switching off the manual way of doing things. And suddenly we've got a whole bunch of people discovering that they can't easily get access to things, or that the systems that have been built, even if they can access them, don't work very well for them, right? And so there's plenty of examples of things like voice recognition that only work if you sound like a very, well-bred British gentleman, which I'm not. But, there's a lot of we kind of think of them as edge cases, and yet they aren't. They're probably the majority case. And sort of some of the challenges that we're describing, they affect us on a daily basis, but probably not that many people in proportional terms. So.
Yeah, I remember I once changed my Amazon voice assistant to British because I wanted it to talk to me using a British accent, not realizing that it also changed the voice model so that it was expecting me to speak with a British accent. So until I got everything fixed, like I had to pretend like I was British.
You realize we're now all waiting for that to happen right now.
Yeah, no, it's not going to happen.
I'm disappointed.
I'm not going to demonstrate. I'll just embarrass myself. But yeah, no, it's fascinating because all these worlds have collided. Even more with the pandemic now. I know people that manage to keep their work stuff and their personal stuff separate. And I've been working out of the home for a decade now, from a home office, and I just can't do it. Like I've purpose built this whole system I have here that I'm using right now just to be on camera. I've got a teleprompter with a camera behind it, so I can look in the camera when I'm talking to someone. I can read my notes and my scripts and stuff like that. And it's too much work to completely segregate work and personal stuff and all the side stuff I do, because I'm also involved in a cybersecurity conference, all in one system. So, I do the best from a, security standpoint, to make sure I'm not exposing, I love that you said crossing the streams, there's no negative consequences of how I'm doing that. But yeah, it's all mixed on all my different systems. I can't separate it out.
Yeah, no, I get it. And, the reality is we're all humans. And identity is one of those interesting areas of the whole technology industry where we spend a lot of time thinking about, okay, what are the human edges of this, right? And there are some really powerful tools that I think help us solve some problems in some very valuable ways. We just got to get on and get it done, right? So,
yeah. Well, before we let you go, I want to jump back to the conference. The conference is June 21st through 24th in Denver, Colorado, correct?
That is correct, yeah. And I'm unbelievably excited that we're going to be back, fully in person this year. So we obviously went, fully virtual in 2020. Last year, we ran a hybrid event. It was very challenging for me. I'm based in the UK, and unfortunately, I couldn't physically travel to the event last year because of the various restrictions. And so it was sad that I couldn't be there myself. So very excited that we'll be together in person this year. The bulk of the agenda is up on the website, and we're looking forward to a pretty vibrant 3 or 4 days. So.
Yeah, and actually throughout late May and early June, we're having 3 Identiverse speakers on this show for interviews.
Yep.
So we're excited about that as well.
Yeah, that's great.
All right, good stuff. Thanks so much for joining us today, Andrew. And anything else that we missed that you want to mention before we wrap?
No, it was great to be on and have a conversation, Adrian. And I hopefully we'll get to maybe you'll come to Identiverse. It'd be good to see you there.
I'd love to. Like it's an area I've not really gone very deep into, which immediately makes me want to do it. It makes me want to jump into a conference like that. So if I can swing it, I've got friends, I've got places I can stay out in Denver. So I'll see if I can make that happen. Yeah.
Perfect.
Thanks again, Andrew. Appreciate you coming on today. And we'll be right back in absolutely. We'll be right back in a few moments with the weekly enterprise news.
Attacks can't be prevented, but they can be stopped. Modern cyber attackers have already made it inside your network, but you have the upper hand. Find and eradicate threats with ExtraHop network detection and response, and shut them out before real damage is done. Learn the advanced techniques attackers are using and how ExtraHop stops them with a live attack simulation. Register at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. That's extra HOP. Hey everyone, this is Paul Asadorian with Security Weekly. I'm super excited to tell you about our latest partnership with Intel. Intel's vPro platform, you might have heard of it before, as it's been around for 15 years. IT and security teams have so many challenges, including trying to keep your computers up to date with patches, making sure all the hardware and software is working for your remote employees, and of course, keeping things secure as possible. Intel's vPro platform is designed to do just that. Make it easier to keep your fleet of computers well-maintained, and as we all know, a well-maintained network is absolutely a more secure network. Join us for an interview with Yasir Rashid, Global Director of Enterprise Client Sales at Intel on May 12th, as we explore the features and solutions provided by the Intel vPro platform. Visit securityweekly.com/Intel for more information. Endpoint security is designed to protect every device in your fleet, wherever it may be. These days, that can be a lot of different places. Find out how HP Wolf Security uses emerging strategies like application isolation, along with a zero-trust approach and framework to give you a powerful, manageable, usable solution to your growing and increasingly spread-out security challenges. Learn how HP Wolf Security can make a difference across your endpoints at securityweekly.com/HP Wolf.
Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Few announcements before we get to the news. Security Weekly listeners can save $100 on their RSA Conference 2022 full conference pass. The RSA Conference will be live in San Francisco June 6th through 9th, 2022. Security Weekly will be there in full force, delivering real-time live coverage and interviewing some of the event's top speakers and sponsors. To register using our discount code, please visit securityweekly.com/RSAC2022 and use the code 52UCyber. That's 52, the letter U, Cyber. We hope to see you there. Also, don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms. We are currently using Twitch and YouTube. And finally, join Paul Asadorian and Rich Mogull on May 4th to learn how to choose the right architecture for your application. Live attendees at this webcast will have a chance to win a $100 Hacker Warehouse gift card. I might be doing this interview for the second time today, but it's just that good. It's going to be really good. Rich and Paul together on May the 4th. Paul's going to be making May the 4th be with you jokes. It's going to be great.
Rich will too. Rich will too.
Yeah, Rich probably, yeah, both Star Wars fans, right? Like, I think we have pictures of both wearing Stormtrooper uniforms or something like that.
I once owned a Darth Vader. I once owned a Darth Vader mask that talked, but I lost it.
I remember those. Those are pretty cool. You can register at securityweekly.com/webcasts. And don't forget to check out our library of on-demand webcasts and technical trainings at securityweekly.com/on-demand. Now for the Enterprise Security Weekly news. You can check out securityweekly.com/ESW271 if you want to check out all the stories and links. And sometimes I say funny stuff about them in the show notes. So you can check that out there. All right. So I was going to start off saying I was checking my directory, my database of all security products and all security companies, and noted that we now have 53 unicorns, which is 10 more than we had in February. So in the last 80 days, the industry has created 10 cybersecurity companies worth over $1 billion. Not that it happened in those 80 days, but that's when they announced that they'd raised funding and had these $1 billion valuations.
That's absolutely crazy fast growth. Has there been any decacorns? Do we have a decacorn count?
We have not hit Decacorn yet. So Sneak, I think it's Sneak, is still the largest with Lacework right behind it, but they're in the mid 8 billion range. I still don't think we have one worth over 10. And part of the thing is like once you get there, is it even still a startup?
I wouldn't even know how to define a situation where we have a company valued at 8 billion. Well, valued at 8 billion, but the real question, to me, the valuation doesn't define whether it's a startup. What matters is the revenue and the size of the company itself and an employee count. That's how I do startups. But here's the thing, 8 billion valuation, it could still be a startup. They could be like 80 people sometimes. So who knows when it comes to unicorns these days.
So I take that back. Tanium is actually on top at 9. So Sneak is number 2, Lacework is number 3, but Tanium is on top there. And perfect example, I think, they were founded in 2007.
Yeah, they need to be IPOing. This whole never IPO routine has got to be getting a little bit tired for early employees at some of these companies.
And they have how many employees? LinkedIn says they have over 2,200 employees.
Yeah, they're all way too big to be privately held companies. I think it's just a function of why go through the oversight of being a public company and having to deal with the public, the SEC, the reporting requirements, all of that stuff when you can remain private and, hey, you can continue to burn at whatever rate you want and go get more funding at some outrageous valuation if and when you need it.
So I've got some fun stats here on the unicorns. So far this year, 11 cybersecurity unicorns have been made. So 11 so far in 2022, which is 2 more than we had by this same date in 2021. So an increase of about 18% on unicorn creation. And if we keep up with that increase over 2021, we should see at least 32 new unicorns by the end of 2022. For a total of 74 cybersecurity unicorns by the end of the year. And they're all going to IPO, all of them. They're all going to have very successful exits. No, they're not.
No, they're not.
And who's going to buy them? Broadcom? Help Systems? No, not
Elon Musk.
I'd imagine a big chunk of them, a high percentage of them at some point will have to IPO. And to do that, they'll have to figure out how to get their spend down, their burn down to a reasonable rate and IPO the company and become a publicly traded company. That's where I imagine a good chunk of the bigger ones will go. Now, the question is the bulk, right? The 80 of the 80-20 here, where do they go? Those ones are the ones I'd be more concerned about.
Yeah, and I think Elon's probably done with his acquisitions for the year, maybe. Tesla shareholders might come after him if he tries to pick up anything else.
Maybe. It'll be Twitter shareholders, not Tesla shareholders.
I didn't quite get that.
Twitter shareholders. Never mind.
Sorry, Larry. I'm not sure if you're hearing that, Tyler, but it's dropping in and out for me.
I speak Larry. It's fine.
What?
Yeah, you are going in and out, buddy. You're fading in and out a little bit.
Weird.
It's like a loose connection kind of.
That's the best shot we've seen all day right there. The shrugging Larry shot.
Yeah,
let's see that one more time. Cut right back there.
That's the thumbnail.
I love it.
There's your thumbnail, Gus. So some other stats. So first of all, I think a huge chunk of these are going to end up going to PE firms and getting squished together. They're going to go for less than 10x, probably not horrible exits, but not amazing exits. I just can't see it going any other way. And then I thought the geography of the cybersecurity startups was interesting because only 32% are Silicon Valley based. And Silicon Valley, it's a very, wide, I'm drawing a very wide circle. Like it goes around Oakland and, other side of the Bay. So Sunnyvale, all that. But less than a third and 25%, 1 out of every 4 cybersecurity unicorns aren't even US based. 20% of them are New York City based, actually.
They're not US based, but they're New York City based?
No, that's a different 20%. I'm not saying New York. Yeah, I said that badly. I'm not saying New York City is not part of the U.S.
Commas are important in life, folks. Remember to use your commas properly. Do you have a stat on Israeli? I bet you there's a huge percentage that are Israeli.
Yeah, 6 of them. So 6 would be. I need a calculator. Windows is thinking about giving me a calculator. 11%. So just over 10% are Israeli.
I'm surprised at the number that you said in New York. I didn't realize there were that many cyber companies based in New York, although one of the trends that happens out of Israeli companies is they'll start in Israel and then have a U.S. headquarters in New York. And so that could be convoluting some of those numbers as people think they are New York-based companies originally.
Absolutely. And it happens earlier and earlier now. It used to happen in later stages. Now I see it happening like Series A, Series B. So yeah, several of these could be, more in that Israeli bucket, but they have a U.S. headquarters, so they're showing up as different. But
yeah, potentially Boston too. I've worked with a number of cyber or even non-cyber related Israeli companies that we've brought over to Boston. They tend to run in one of those 2 cities.
Yeah, 3 of them are Boston.
Yeah.
So Cyber Reason is one of those, and they have Israeli, beginnings and founders, right?
Yep, absolutely, they do.
Yep. All right. So that's it for my stats, my noodling on the state of unicorns in cybersecurity. Always interesting to see that. And what kind of prompted me to do that is we have a new one, Sonar Source, raised, who are the people who make Sonar Cube, raised $412 million at a 4.9. I don't think I have it in here. I think it was 4.9 billion dollar valuation, and they're Swiss-based.
Sonar Cube has been around forever, and interestingly enough, on your notes there, I also didn't know the note that you put on there. Adrian, go ahead and tell the audience about that note.
Yeah, so I was very confused because I found I was trying to compare Sneak and Sonar Source, and I kept getting results for Sonar Cube, and then I realized that their product was Sonar Cube, but I was getting completely different websites for each. So if you go to sonarcube.org, it looks like a totally different company from sonarsource.com. Different branding, different logos, different everything. But it's all the same company, apparently. They just have completely different branding for the open source side of things and for the commercial side of things. And I'm not sure why that is. I found it very confusing.
I had no idea of that case. And when I've been getting calls for, advisory things that I do on the side and different other kind of briefings and inquiries that I get, people, a lot of times enterprises will come and say, oh yeah, we're using X product, Y product, we're using Sonar Cube for this. And it's funny, I never bothered to look up and compare Sonar Cube and Sonar Source. And I had no idea that was the case. I've just, for the last, as long as I can remember, told people not to use it.
Yeah.
All right. That was a little snark. You're supposed to laugh at my snark.
All right. Should we move on? Was there any stuff here that you guys want to jump to that you found especially interesting?
Did you look into what Weed Jungle is? What is Weed Jungle? It sounds like a video game my kids might play.
It does. It was not one that I had time to dig into.
They raised $22 million.
Seed funding of $22 million.
On a unified cybersecurity platform, Weed Jungle announced a seed funding of $22 million. That is absolutely insane. That means the valuation's got to be $60 million or more.
It looks like a
Weed Jungle enables organizations to secure and strengthen their network through a single window.
Oh man!
Yeah, it looks like
it's
maybe
AI and ML based platform.
Ooh, I'm feeling the buzzword bingo going off here a little bit. Feeling it. The get a little buzzy.
Yeah, it looks like a UTM basically. It looks like maybe a competitor with like a Unify type of device, like a Ubiquity. But for small businesses, and then layering some UTM type stuff on there, maybe some subscription stuff, like if you want to add AV agents, or if you want to add DLP or something like that, like you just switch on that stuff. That's how it's coming across to me.
I think we talked about this the last week or two ago. I don't remember the exact show episode that we talked about this, but that there's kind of an underserved market in some of that small to mid-sized business approach. And we had seen a couple of weeks ago, I can't remember the name of the company off the top of my head, raise some ungodly amount of money. Mm-hmm. And it was just like, it was based on a similar thing. It was like a product that had been around for 8 to 10 years in idea, right? And this company comes in and says, we'll create something similar and just sell it to the small and mid-sized business because it's a completely untapped market. And apparently it's working well. If companies like Weed Jungle can get 22 million right out of the gate.
Yeah, they're India based, and it's a combination of like a WAF, next gen firewall, and a UTM all in one.
Could also be it could also be not only just targeting small to mid-size, but could also target a new geo, an untapped geography.
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, and the one from last week that you were calling is Threat Locker, where the 100 million Series C. Selling very down market, very small to mid-size, but all apparently MSPs, all channels. So they had like 2,300 or 23,000, customers. And the only way that you get to that kind of scale by Series C is lots and lots of channel.
Yeah. You almost have to do it for the massive, as the average contract value and deal value goes down in these plays, you either have to find a channel to fulfill it at high volume, or you have to find a self-fulfilling product-like growth or bottoms-up approach to go to market. It's the only way as the ACVs go down that you can maintain a business structure properly.
Yeah. Also here we have yet another, I feel like we see a Kubernetes-based company, a company that basically makes like an open source Kubernetes security product, and then a company grows out of it. And that's the case with Armo, who is the creators behind the open source Kubescape. So they announced $30 million in funding today. That's a Series A led by Tiger Global. And there's just tons of these. Feels like.
Yeah, I have a question, and I'm going to show my ignorance here, and I generally don't have a problem showing my ignorance to the public, so you guys can all jump on me in chat if you like. But when a company that makes an open source product gets $30 million in funding, it's to do what? It's to create a go-to-market engine that sells, basically, right? Because the idea of the open source product is that it's contributed by others in the open source, and the community builds it, maintains it, and runs it. So really, you're talking about a $30 million go-to-market model here. But what I have found is a lot of times these kind of companies getting funded on the back of an open source product are the only ones developing the product. And sometimes that open source, and I'll put that in quotes, air quotes for those that aren't watching the live stream, sometimes that really is still a privately held company. You're just kind of giving away your IP in some ways, right? Because you're making it open. So this is always such a gray area for me with regards to how a company like Kubescape plans to make enough money to justify a $30 million funding round. It's going to be interesting to see. There's this one, there's Project Discovery. There's a number of them that have been funded at higher dollar amounts recently. And a lot of that's coming on the back of these companies like Tiger Global and others that are, I'll describe it as the early stage spray and pray. They're trying to index the entire market, right? Let's just literally give any money to anybody with any even reasonably good idea and basic traction, and we'll hit enough home runs to offset the losers, right? So it's going to be neat to watch the open source space in cybersecurity. I think that's still really developing in a way that people haven't put the time into to truly understand.
So I think there's different models here. I think there are open source projects where somebody puts it together to solve a problem that they personally have, or maybe it's developed by a team inside a company, and then they break it out into a company, or at some point they get enough people asking them saying, "Hey, I love this product, would love to get enterprise support." Then they found the company. But I think what we're seeing here and what we have been seeing is a bit different. And I look at it more like an alternative to doing a freemium offering, where the open source product it is functional and it is like the core engine of the product, but it's missing the SaaS piece. It's missing enterprise management, or it's missing some kind of scalability component are the three most common things I've seen. And that's why you pay. So it's not just like, we're using Linux and we need, Red Hat to give us commercial support. It's more than that. Like there's features missing. There's some key stuff that you would want in an enterprise product that's missing in the open source.
So in some ways it's a neutered version, right? It's a lesser than version is what you're suggesting.
Yeah.
So
which is why I think of it as freemium.
Yeah. So, but you sometimes see those ones that have like, it's funny. Open source is always measured in the number of stars on GitHub or whatever, right? The number of follows and forks and all that stuff. You see these things gain significant traction, like huge traction. They can't be getting that traction unless they've got enough of a design from a product standpoint to get, the buyers on board, or at least the users on board in that particular regard. So, I think you bring up a good point about the less than versions, or the neutered versions or slightly lower versions. There's also the model that some companies use of outsourcing like certain pieces of it, that the core engine, they open source certain pieces but keep the core engine, that kind of thing too, which is a different open source model. So there's so many different ways you can slice the engine, or slice the apple, that I think it would be worth a deep dive at some point for somebody to break open these open source cyber companies and see which ones are doing what and how they're doing it.
Yeah. This reminds me very much of the Rapid7 model that they went for with Metasploit. They fully acquired an open source project. They still have an open source project. That, from my understanding, the main engine is still all open source, but you're paying for enterprise support. You're paying for early access to features. You're paying for features that didn't exist, much like
you're paying for a staff of developers to keep putting out Metasploit modules also.
Yep.
So does anybody have any idea, Larry, do you have any idea about that, if they make money on Metasploit?
It's a sales tool. It's a loss leader.
That's what I'm getting at.
They throw in a couple of Metasploit Pro licenses to get a deal done, and then nobody ever uses it because they're not allowed to run Metasploit in production.
Yeah, so that's what I was getting at, right?
That's my opinion.
Feels to me like it's one of those break-even acquisitions. Let's get enough of an acquisition that it drives an uplift in our overall revenue number to offset the money we spent on the acquisition. And as long as we break even every year on the product, we're happy with it. We're not trying to make a ton of money by selling Metasploit licenses. It's a guess, though. I don't know.
They didn't just get Metasploit. They also hired HD as part of that, and they had HD there building new cool things and drawing talent to the company and drawing customers to the company for a good 4 to 6 years or something like that before he eventually split off and started a new thing.
Yeah. Now if I were to somebody to ask me about Rapid7 and what do they do, I'd say, well, they do that Metasploit Pro thing, but they also have this whole herd of pen testers. Like, if you had to ask me what they did, I'd say they do pen testing. Like,
wow.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you do look at a lot of these companies' website, and you go to like the pricing page, there's usually like a comparison thing, and they show you, okay, here's what the open source product can do. And armosec.io, if you go there for this company, for this Kubescape, it's no different, and they basically show you, okay, here's what you're paying for. And in this case, it's the data retention is restricted in the free version, and the number of worker nodes is restricted to 10. So basically, it's enough to do a POC, which in a lot of cases, I see that being like if I got to go through 8 sales meetings or something like that, 8 meetings with SDRs and frontline salespeople just to get my hands on some code, just to get my hands on the product so I can take a look at it and test it out. Like that's a deterrent to buying your product. So I think this is another way where, like, because you're putting it out there into public, it's got to be fairly polished. If you're just letting, anybody just go to GitHub and start messing with your product, and if it looks like junk, then that's a very quick way to rule out vendors that aren't going to work for you. That's how I see it. All right, let's see what else here. I thought this So number 6 and number 7, Tyler, I thought you'd find this interesting. You know, it was not just fundraising here. So Privy closed a tiny $4 million Series A. But that's not what interested me. It's the next item here, the getlatka.com link, where the guy apparently just shared, you know, the revenue, the customer numbers, the growth, like just shared all his numbers with them, which is not something I've often seen, but apparently that's something you can get from this website. And the numbers make it look pretty good. You know, I don't know how much he's fluffing those numbers, but, you know, no wonder they only raised a $4 million Series A if they're, you know, projecting 11.4 million in revenue for 2022.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. So in 2022, they hit 11.4 million in revenue. But if you look at the growth rate, 3 million to 9 million occurred over about 18 months, 2018. Yeah, about 18 months up through 2020. 2020 to 2021, it looks like they did 2 million in revenue. So it went from 200% growth to 27% growth. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure I trust these numbers. Oh no, those are totals. No, that's total revenue. So I'm not sure I trust the numbers, because I don't know who would invest in a company that's only doing 27% growth after doing 200% growth. That's quite a slowdown. And then depending on what they're projecting in this year, seems interesting. Now, what could be kind of cool is if they actually are doing this profitably, which is unheard of in startup world. If they're doing this profitably, then I could see why you might take just, hey, I'm just going to take in a little bit, 4 million. I'm going to build this thing, compound it for the next 10 years as a, you know, quasi lifestyle business and turn it into something that returns, you know, 50 million, 100 million to me when I'm ready to retire, right? That's like a fantastic exit.
Yeah. And what's funny here is I'm not even sure I've got the right privy here. You know, so some of the sources when I prep,
that sounds like a problem, Adrian.
Like, yeah,
it looks
like
you want to make sure you're using the right restroom, man.
They're not really a security company. You know, they get, looks like sales and marketing leads for you, but it's
the former CMO of HubSpot invested, so that makes total sense.
Yeah, but yeah, there are a lot of name collisions here, so it might have been a name collision thing, because some of the sources where I get these funding announcements don't include links to them. They just include the name of the companies. And yeah, sometimes it's late at night when I'm putting this together, but still found that interesting though, regardless of.
And now looking at the metrics, it's kind of like, wow, that's all right. That's bizarre.
Yeah. Another mystery here is Spider Oak. Like, Spider Oak's been around for a while. There's no announcement around this raise. You know, it's a $2.4 million raise, no series, you know, label on it, nothing like that. And they were pretty early on. I think they were one of the ones that was advertising as like an alternative to Signal and Slack.
Yeah, secure collaborations, communications, enclave type thing.
Yeah. And I know people who have used them, but I just find this, this kind of like why would, maybe because it's small, why would you not announce your funding? Why is there no information about who did the funding? Nothing.
How did you find this link?
Your buddy Mike. Remember that podcast?
Interesting.
Or not podcast, but that newsletter that I mentioned last week.
Security funded newsletter.
Yeah, security funded. Yep.
Yep. Interesting.
That's also where Privy came from. So I need to go back and figure out if I found the wrong Privy.
Hey, Mike, give us better data. Your data is probably right. Our ability to read it is kind of awful, though.
Yeah, no, the due diligence is on me. That's on me. I'll take that. I'll take the L.
I want to jump to number 9. I think we got to talk about number 9. Tenable acquiring Bit Discovery. And for what it's worth, I'm going to call it BitSite like 4 times and be wrong. It's called Bit Discovery, but I cannot stop saying BitSite.
And it's funny because BitSite also scans the entire internet. So it's kind of like what we were talking with Rich earlier. where it's like you've got all these companies that are attack surface management vendors, but for different reasons. So in BitSight's case, it's for third-party risk management to assign a score to a company. So for them, attack surface, scanning and all that stuff is just to generate a score. But some people use it like an attack surface management product, which is, kind of blurs the lines now between these.
Yeah, no, I definitely have some thoughts on this particular topic, right? The EASM, External Attack Surface Management Market, the security scoring market, right? The BitSight versus the Bit.
Yeah.
The other one.
Bit Discovery.
I told you I'm going to screw that up.
Discovery.
Right. So you got the scorers, you got the scanners, right? The threat landscape scanner kind of folks. Then you got the white hats that are primarily actually scanning certain ports. So you can almost double click and say, you got the guys and gals that look at the broad level, what's open and what's available, kind of asset management and threat management from an external point of view. Then you got the deep divers say, hey, if I find an 80 or a 443, I'm going to scan the hell out of that port. Then you've got the broad scanners, and then you've got the scorers. And in reality, this is all one thing. This all needs to be one product that you buy.
Yeah, and that when I analyzed this market a year ago, I took 9 of these, including Bit Discovery, and put them through the paces, explored them, and found some very different categories within here. So one category is we scan the whole internet, and you pay a fee for access to that database. Bit Discovery is in that category where you can not only look at your own stuff, but you can look at other companies on there. So you can use it as like a research platform. So, Census, Shodan, Security Trails, Asset Shadows, maybe? No, Digital Shadows is all about data leaks. They try and discover data leaks. So they'll let you know if your company is leaking data.
So that's also one that needs to be rolled into that same.
It does.
Threat management.
I consider it a subcategory.
Yeah.
Yeah. So GitGuardian is the same way, except GitGuardian looks for credential leaks in code repositories. So there's this whole subcategory of data leak discovery, basically. Data leak detection is what I usually call it. But yeah, it's all about finding this stuff that's publicly available that can cause you pain, that represents some kind of risk to you.
And so when we talk about Tenable picking this up, right, is Tenable saying, hey, we're going to, obviously they're saying we're going to get into this business of understanding the breadth of your available risk. But at the same time, Tenable does deep dive scanning for vulns. They do like threat and vuln hunting on individual ports. So that's an interesting marriage, I think, of two value propositions.
Well, the idea here is, look, your external vulnerability scan is already done. Bit Discovery has it in their database.
And continuously updates it too. It's always fresh.
Yeah. So Bit Discovery, that's the real value in Bit Discovery, is they built a really solid hyperscale platform, that not only gathers all this stuff all the time, they're gathering more data than anybody else I looked at. It takes them seconds to give you the results of that. Whereas some of these other guys, like, they get some stuff in there, some stuff they don't. Like, they're missing certain data types. It's more spotty with some of the other vendors, or they do kind of like a just-in-time thing where they're like, when they onboard the customer, they say, yeah, your results will be ready in 48 to 72 hours or something like that. Yeah. Whereas BitSight's got it, right now.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And then I always like to read the about blurb whenever I get a press release. I always like to read the about blurb and then think about how that is a positioning for the company, right? And Tenable,
the rationale
it describes, really, if you read somebody's company about blurb, it tells you how they want to position themselves, right? Because it's like the 3 sentences that say, here's what we do in a fundamental, basic way. The opening sentence in the about Tenable blurb is, Tenable is the cyber exposure company, which I find very telling. I don't think that's what they used to call themselves. I think they've changed that position a bit.
That's new.
Yeah, that's new, and it's really kind of lending a lot of credence to understanding going that just beyond vuln hunting and looking for 0-day or looking for known vulns on an external port and saying, hey, we're going to check everything about your cyber exposure, which is much more of a kind of a attack surface management or threat modeling or threat exposure type of position.
Yeah, so it's interesting. When you jump into some of these other folks, they all kind of build on each other. So like if you look at a Randori or Psycognito, they're not scanning the whole internet all the time. Instead, what they focused on is what I like to call seed discovery. So they only grab your data when they onboard you as a customer, but you can just give them your company name, and that's it. They'll figure out what your external assets are. So if you've got, or you give them one domain, they'll find your other 27 domains. Which I think is the really valuable thing here, because I think the problem that a lot of companies have is they don't know what they don't have. So I remember going into a company and looking at their Rapid7 Nexpose configuration and finding that they had misspelled 13 of their 14 domains that they were doing web app scans of. Somehow they had managed to get .co on 13 of the 14 ones when they all should have been .com.
Oh, gosh.
Because one was correct, they were getting results, so they thought it was working. But when I looked at it, I was like, this is not nearly enough for everything that they're scanning. And sure enough, went and looked, and somehow they managed to copy and paste and leave the M off on a bunch of them. So it's predicated on this whole idea of, look, a lot of these companies, like they get a lot of tech debt. They've been around for 20, 30, 100 years or whatever. They're not going to know the right input to give a security tool. So we should go out there and find it for them.
Absolutely. Sounds good to me.
So Adrian, I went over to the Bit Discovery website, and I thought that was kind of funny because high fidelity attack surface mapping and request a demo, and I scroll down, and the first thing that comes up in pink is a little media report, and it's written by this guy from SC Magazine, Adrian Sanabria.
Oh my God! Look at that! Look at that big pink banner with my name.
We know that guy. We know that guy.
I've heard of him before.
That's what you get when you have the audacity to say you're going to go out and test an entire category, which is it's not easy. I'll tell you. Like this market was easy because most of these companies were small, but once you hit larger vendors, they're less comfortable with you testing their product in your lab, let's say. But yeah, no, it was a lot of fun. Because I did not understand this market when I went into it, and I thought it was all going to be like Shodan Plus and Shodan Plus Plus, and what I found was completely different. I found that that's really the lower end of the market that scans the whole internet and says, hey, you can pay a fee to access my internet scan database. Found this whole section of the market that is essentially doing external vulnerability scans. All right. Should we hit the so let's see, 2 more acquisitions here. Devo acquired an autonomous SOC company, and I've got a buddy over there at Devo, and I've been joking it should be called not a SOC, because if it's autonomous SOC, you're taking the people out of it, and what is a SOC but people? So it's they should call it not a SOC. So he owes me a beer or something like that if he renames the product not a SOC.
Yeah, wonderful Adrian marketing tip of the day, for sure.
I think it's good. I think it's a good pitch. And then Sophos acquired a company. It's basically SOC as a service, which I'm not going to pronounce because it sounds funny when you pronounce it. And yeah, let's just... I've got to mention the MindPass password manager, number 16. So they've got this idea that somehow it's an improvement. So they give you like this 3D rendered room, and this room is full of objects. And the way you authenticate and log into your password database is only the 4 or 5 objects to choose in the correct order. And the idea is it's really easy to remember which objects you picked. So that's your password, is just in this 3D room, tapping on these objects. So teapot, fork, chair, bowl. I don't know. And
Okay.
somehow that's easier than just putting your thumbprint on the thumbprint reader on your smartphone. I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I'm not buying that one.
Yeah, see, Adrian, I think maybe something like this might be interesting, and I don't agree with this is good, but the thing that might be fun was if you start doing your authentication in something like the metaverse this way.
Ooh,
yeah, that's kind of how I
interesting
described it.
Yeah,
I was mentally checked out on that story, Larry, until you dropped that nugget of gold.
Yeah, actually, the way I introduced it in the beginning is I forget what I said. I had something about metaverse in there. Using the metaverse to log into your password manager.
I don't really listen to you, Adrian.
What? I know it.
Caught me.
All right. And our squirrel story for today, number 18, that Twitter link right there, this amazing thread. I'm not even sure where this university is, but Austin Peay State University sends out a tweet. APSU alert, ransomware attack. This is not a test. Shut down all computers now. And they sent this out to the public internet. And the replies in here, especially Johnny Christmas, is all up in these replies with
yes,
just bucket loads of snark. It is. I mean, it shouldn't be funny, but I mean, if you're gonna publish that to Twitter, there's going to be some trolling.
Yeah, buddy of mine,
excellent memes.
Dan King said, "I hope Twitter isn't the only way you're notifying students." And Johnny Christmas's
I saw that.
Well, they can't email because the computers are off and students have blocked the school's phone numbers due to perpetual. I know you're $80K in debt, but you should consider donating.
Yeah,
he's not wrong. He's not wrong.
Yeah. That's a conversation that needs to be had. Absolutely. Like, how much am I paying for this education? And like, you're notifying me over Twitter that you didn't secure your stuff. But I mean, universities are pretty challenging. We had, what was her name from a university security team the other day? She was like 1 of 4, 1 of 5, blanking on her name. But it's tough. It's tough to give them that much hate because, like, anybody who's worked at a university, like, you know how big of a struggle it is to lock things down at a university or to do really anything security related at a university. Like, it just goes against the culture in general.
But Adrian, somebody commented, and I found it to be the funniest one. They said, "Yes, thanks for notification, but ransomware is spelled as one word." And then I went back up and realized they had indeed spelled it ransom space where.
They did. Like I said, I mean, it's a good time. I highly recommend that thread. There. So many. Yep. Catherine Ullman. Yeah, it sounds right. Yeah, and that was episode 268. So just to be clear, this is not her university. She's up in Buffalo, if I recall correctly. Does anybody know where Austin Peay is? Whoa, close to me.
Tennessee.
Clarksville, Tennessee. Where is Clarksville, Tennessee?
They spell ransomware as two words in Clarksville, Tennessee.
It's not so. Yeah. I'm pretty sure that's not the only thing they misspell. Okay, so they're northwest of Nashville, so it's not that
close. You can make those jokes. You're down there. I can't make those jokes. That would be mean.
You're in North Carolina. It's basically like an extension of the same state. See how much hate I get for that.
Nope. So, some of the best parts looking at their Twitter account, 23 hours ago, cyber attack in process of containment. D2L is safe and secure access through elearn.apsu.edu. Thanks. And APSU alert. APSU is open tomorrow. All employees report as normal. See your APSU email for further instructions. I can't. They're shut down.
Oh, my God. So does that mean they paid? Like, they got that cleaned up pretty quick.
Yeah.
Yeah. If come in as normal tomorrow, like that was just it was yesterday that original one went out.
Yep.
Oh my God. There are actually 2 alerts that went out, Tyler, and one of them misspells ransomware in a different way than the other one.
Oh no, I didn't catch that.
So they removed the space between ransom and ware, but then put an E between them. So it's ransomware.
Ransomware.
Well, you know, I mean, they were firing that out on the keyboard pretty quick, I imagine. They weren't too worried about spelling. Bless their hearts, I think, is the appropriate response to this. Bless their hearts.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Thanks so much, Tyler and Larry, for joining me today. Anybody still listening to the live, if you are in the live stream, if you are in our Discord, we're going to jump over to the after party channel here in just a moment. But big thanks to everybody for watching or listening to this week's episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. A heartfelt goodbye to Johnny, and come give Johnny a proper send off. See you in the after party channel.